In Atlanta worked two police officers who went to college and excelled in the Georgia Police Academy. They were Garrett Rolfe and Devin Brosnan. On the night of June 12, 2020, a drunk black man named Rayshard Brooks was in the area and had fallen asleep in the drive-thru of an Atlanta, Georgia Wendy's. Rayshard had been drunk driving, and his head resting on his car's steering wheel. He was married, had a stepson and 3 daughters. Rayshard Brooks was also known for regularly abusing his children, leading to him being arrested for false imprisonment and felony cruelty. He was convicted in a Fulton County courtroom of 4 charges after being tried for this incident, and he was sentenced to 1 year in prison. Rayshard served prison time for 3 of the 4 charges, receiving 1 year each, but being ordered to serve them concurrently at the same time. In addition to that, Rayshard Brooks was sentenced to 6 years of probation for his 4th charge. He had been out on bond and served his term in state prison from 2014 to 2015. In 2016, Rayshard was arrested for violating his probation and sent back to prison after a revised sentencing hearing in Clayton County, Georgia. Before the decision was made, he had been denied bond and held in Georgia's Clayton County Jail. It took 1 year to resentence Rayshard Brooks for the probation violation, ordering him to spend an additional 12 months in state prison. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, he was released early. Rayshard was interviewed by journalists in February 2020 and spoke about the 2 years he spent in prison. He also mentioned difficulties after being released from prison, such as struggling to find a job. Rayshard Brooks was ordered to complete his 1 year probation once again after being released back to society. Being caught with drugs or arrested for driving under the influence could have sent him back to prison once again. He held an occupation as a restaurant worker, working in restaurants around the Atlanta area. While Rayshard was asleep on his driver's wheel after having been drunk driving, customers waiting to order from the Wendy's drive-thru tried to wake him up and check on him. However, he would not wake up, so they alerted the restaurant staff. The staff tried to wake him up as well, but he still would not. This led them to calling the cops. Dispatchers announced a complaint that Wendy's workers had a complaint about a black man who was sleeping in the drive-thru and causing traffic in the restaurant's parking lot. Atlanta police officer Devin Brosnan took the call and headed towards the restaurant. Officer Brosnan had been an officer for nearly 2 years and was willing to respond to this situation in 125 University Avenue, which is in southern Atlanta. Brosnan arrived and parked his police cruiser in one of the restaurant's parking spaces. Wendy's employees were waiting for him to arrive and pointed out Rayshard's car and tapped on the driver's window. Rayshard woke up and pulled his window down to talk to Brosnan. Brosnan noticed that Rayshard Brooks was potentially drunk because he had been asleep on his driving wheel and had watery eyes. He asked Rayshard to park his car in one of the restaurant parking lot spaces. Brosnan waited for him to do so, but Rayshard went back to sleep instead. Officer Brosnan then once again woke Rayshard up and told him to park his car. He stated that did not mean go back to sleep. Rayshard then obeyed his orders and parked his car. Officer Brosnan then asked him for his ID and scanned it. Brosnan then called DUI Specialized Police Officer Garrett Rolfe and asked him to help out. Officer Rolfe arrived and asked Rayshard to get out of his vehicle. Rayshard obeyed and let Rolfe speak to him. Rayshard agreed to take in sobriety tests to see if he had been drunk driving. He admitted that he did have drinks, but did not mention that he had too much. He also denied driving to the restaurant and was unaware of where he was, giving out the wrong location. Rayshard was so drunk that he thought he was on a highway, but really he was at a Wendy's parking lot. Rolfe conducted tests, to which Rayshard continued to show signs of being drunk and was uncooperative. Rolfe then had Rayshard do a breathalyzer test, to which he successfully completed. The breathalyzer resulted in a blood alcohol level of 0.108%, which is more than the legal limit of 0.8%. This meant that Rayshard Brooks had been drunk driving. He claimed that he could leave the car in the parking lot overnight and walk to his sister's house, which according to him was minutes away. Officer Rolfe informed Rayshard that he had too much to drink to be driving, and tried to place him under arrest. However, Rayshard resisted and wrestled with Officer Rolfe. Officer Rolfe took his taser out and tried to tase him 2 times, but that did not stop Rayshard from resisting. Rayshard punched Rolfe and made him drop the taser. Officer Brosnan as well jumped in to try to arrest him, drawing his taser as well. Rayshard then pulled Brosnan's taser out of his hand and ran off with it. He tried to tase the officers multiple times and used all of the taser's ammo. Brosnan was tased and fell to the ground head first, slamming the concrete. He then hid behind Rolfe's police car for protection. Officer Rolfe pulled out his handgun and shot Rayshard Brooks. He felt that he had no time to get his dropped taser from the ground and continue chasing him. Rayshard dropped to the ground injured, and Rolfe performed CPR on him while calling for emergency personnel. Rayshard Brooks was rushed to the hospital and surgery was performed on him. However, he did not survive the surgery and passed away. Officer Rolfe was cleared after the incident. He had accidentally shot a car nearby waiting in the Wendy's drive-thru, which contained 3 people inside. The people confronted Rolfe and took pictures of what had occurred to the car. Those images were then shown to the Atlanta police station and sent to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, also known as the GBI. Officer Brosnan suffered a concussion from falling on the ground and was taken to the hospital to be treated for it. He was shortly after released from there. The GBI would start investigating the incident. The following day, on June 13, 2020, Officer Garrett Rolfe was fired from the Atlanta Police Department. The other police officer, Devin Brosnan, was placed on unpaid administrative leave, meaning that he had been suspended without pay. Fulton County Medical Examiner Karen Sullivan ruled that Rayshard Brooks died from the gunshots that had hit him, and that he had a lot of blood loss causing his death. Therefore, this death was ruled a murder, but it could have been an unintentional murder or a justified murder. With help from the job benefits these officers received, they hired attorneys to defend them. Garrett Rolfe was assigned to attorney Lance LaRusso, and Devin Brosnan to attorney Don Samuel. Fulton County prosecutors Paul Howard and Fannie Willis, during the investigation, announced 11 charges against the officers on June 17, 2020. They claimed that Officer Rolfe unrolled a bandage and placed it on Rayshard Brooks' torso, and that he said, "I got him," after the shooting. These claims were shortly after disputed. Attorney Howard claimed that due to Rayshard Brooks having used all of the ammo in the taser that he had taken, he posed no danger and should not have been killed. He also claimed that the officers did not provide appropriate medical assistance for over 2 minutes after Rayshard had been shot. Lastly, Howard accused Officer Rolfe of kicking Rayshard and Officer Brosnan of holding his shoulders. Howard also made additional statements, claiming that Officer Rolfe placed handcuffs on Rayshard without informing him that he was under arrest. A toxicology report released by the GBI claimed that Rayshard Brooks was under the influence of alcohol, cocaine, prescription sedative, and eutalone at the time of his death. This report went against Howard's claims, which were that Rayshard Brooks was only slightly impaired. There were more reports regarding the investigation. One claimed that Officer Rolfe did indeed provide appropriate medical care to Rayshard Brooks while emergency personnel arrived, and another showed that no witnesses ever claimed that Rolfe said, "I got him" or kicked him. The charges filed against the officers were the following. For Garrett Rolfe, 1 count of felony murder, 5 counts of aggravated assault, 4 counts of police oath violation, and 1 count of damage to property. For Devin Brosnan, 1 count of aggravated assault, and 2 counts of violation of oath. Their defense attorneys informed them it was time to surrender to authorities and be booked into jail. Both officers turned themselves into the Fulton County Jail hours after the charges were filed. They arrived with their attorneys. The prosecutors only granted Devin Brosnan a bail, which was a signature bail of $50,000. In the jail, he signed the bail's form, promising that he will obey the rules of the bail after being released, and pay the $50,000 if he failed to do so. Brosnan was released immediately after he was processed in the jail without paying any money. Him and attorney Samuel were greeted by news reporters on their way out. Garrett Rolfe, on the other hand, was not allowed to leave jail until a state judge set bond for him. Attorney Lance LaRusso left the jail without him and as well ran into news reporters. Rolfe was immediately transferred to the Gwinnett County Jail for safekeeping due to concerns of violence in the Fulton County Jail that constantly occurred. That is where he remained after being denied bail. When Rolfe was jailed, the Georgia Law Enforcement Organization raised funds to pay for his legal fees and expenses. Both officers pleaded not guilty to the charges against them after waiving a first appearance hearing. Georgia State Judge Christopher Brasher presided over their case. Garrett Rolfe now had his bond set to $500,000 with conditions after being released. On July 1st, 2020, Rolfe posted bond with the jail funds donated to him and was released from jail to await trial. Since he had been fired, he appealed to get his job back. On August 2nd, prosecutor Paul Howard requested a warrant to investigate the fundraising website that had raised money for Garrett Rolfe. Attorney Lance LaRusso claimed that Howard only wanted the website donors investigated because they believed in Rolfe's innocence. This warrant was shortly after denied. 2 days later, on August 4th, Prosecutor Howard claimed that Rolfe had unlawfully left the state of Georgia and went to Florida for a vacation trip. Attorney Lance LaRusso then mentioned that Rolfe was not on house arrest and that his bond conditions did not prohibit him from leaving the state, and that he had notified the prosecution via email that he would be leaving. The judge refused to revoke Rolfe's bond and dismissed the claim. However, Rolfe's bond conditions were changed and he was no longer allowed to travel out of the state while awaiting trial. On August 12th of that year, Howard was voted out of office and only the other prosecutor, Fannie Willis, would remain in the case. However, Howard continued serving his term until it ended in January 2021. Willis was now the new elected district attorney. Despite winning the Democratic primary election, Fannie Willis petitioned the Georgia Attorney General, Chris Cass, to take on the case for her. She claimed that the investigation taking place concerned her because she believed that the decision to prosecute it was too politically motivated, and that rules of the Georgia Bar Association that lawyers are supposed to follow had been violated. Chris Carr, under Georgia state law, promised to appoint a new prosecutor in the case. However, he rejected Willis's request to be excused from prosecuting it, claiming that there was no reason to have her be disqualified. The officer's attorneys filed a petition to dismiss the charges against them, claiming that they had defended themselves and that prosecutor Paul Howard had made false statements against them. This petition was sent to the Georgia District Attorney's Office. While awaiting a decision to dismiss the charges, Garrett Rolfe appeared virtually in an Atlanta City Board meeting with his attorney Lance LaRusso, asking to be let back into the police department where he worked. Rolfe refused to answer any questions regarding the shooting and invoked his Fifth Amendment right. His attorney filed a lawsuit on his behalf against the Atlanta mayor, Keisha Bottoms, and interim police chief Rodney Bryant. This lawsuit was as well on the behalf of the other officer, Devin Brosnan. The lawsuit accused both the mayor and chief of working together in the case and wrongfully firing Atlanta police officer Garrett Rolfe and suspending the other one, Devin Brosnan. It is known that the city's official chief, Erica Shields, resigned after the shooting. The family of Rayshard Brooks sued the city of Atlanta for wrongful death. The lawsuit was proposed by his widow, Tamika Miller, and the ones in charge of prosecuting it were the Stewart Miller Simmons law firm. The lawsuit alleged that the city of Atlanta failed to properly follow their appropriate procedures and disciplinary actions. These attorneys representing the Brooks family showed disappointment towards Attorney General Chris Carr because they wished he had appointed a better prosecutor that would take the two officers' felony cases more seriously. Paul Howard stepped down from prosecuting Garrett Rolfe, leaving Fannie Willis to prosecute both officers herself. Willis did not want to do this, so she petitioned the judge in the case to add another prosecutor to work with her. Her request was addressed, and Special Prosecutor Pete Skandalakis, who was the executive director of the Prosecuting Attorneys Council of Georgia, was assigned to prosecute with her. He was mainly in charge of prosecuting Rolfe. On May 5, 2021, Garrett Rolfe was reinstated and would be allowed to return to his job as a police officer once his case was over. He as well received back pay for the time that he had been terminated. The Atlanta City Service Board found he was not afforded his rights to due process and deserved to have his job back. The GBI tied prosecutor Paul Howard to a criminal probe for making false statements about the officers and started investigating him. In August 2022, Chris Carr, the Georgia Attorney General, accepted the petition to dismiss the officers' charges. Prosecutors in the felony case then dropped the charges against both Garrett Rolfe and Devin Brosnan. Officer Rolfe returned to work after the charges were dropped and continued working in the DUI unit. He was then upgraded and switched over to the fugitive unit. Now, Officer Rolfe searches for wanted suspects in the area, mainly murder suspects. The other officer, Devin Brosnan, as well had a chance to return to work, but refused to do so and resigned because he had felt disrespected by the industry. He claimed that after allegations of the shooting were announced against him, he tried to repeatedly contact his police union, the International Brotherhood of Police, for help, but nobody ever answered him, leading to him being ordered to be booked in jail. Brosnan is now working a civilian job as an accountant. On the other hand, the other officer, Garrett Rolfe, was contacted by attorney Lance LaRusso 24 hours after contacting the union. Brosnan's attorney filed a lawsuit on his behalf. In January 2024, both officers accused the city of Atlanta, Fulton County, Georgia, former mayor Keisha Bottoms, and former prosecutor Paul Howard, who was voted out of office, of violating their civil rights by having those charges be filed. Attorney Lance LaRusso filed extra federal lawsuits on behalf of both of them. All lawsuits in these cases remain pending, In a later episode, I will discuss the pending lawsuits and their outcomes once they are brought to light, which I suspect will be resolved by 2026. I will also discuss updates on the criminal investigation of former DA Paul Howard. The wrongful death lawsuit proposed by the widow of Rayshard Brooks was brought up to the Atlanta City Council. In November 2022, all 15 city council members agreed to settle the civil lawsuit outside of court, giving $1 million to the Brooks family. This case was shortly after dismissed, the only lawsuit that has been adjudicated at the time of this recording. Thank you so much for listening, and I will keep you updated on the story as the pending cases and investigation of Paul Howard unfold. Please share my podcast to your friends and family, and don't forget to follow Strawberry Inc. and like this episode. I will continue releasing more content like this throughout the year. See you next time.